Hey everyone, happy Friday. So this week we're going to be talking about relationships, or beginning to talk about relationships anyway. So we will be talking about Venus in your natal chart, we'll be talking about the moon in your natal chart, and we'll be talking about asteroid Juno as well in your natal chart. So grab a copy of yours if you have it there. So the last 2 weeks we've been speaking about our identity and the foundations, and I guess the foundations of astrology itself and the natal chart and how it all works. So I hope you've kind of got the grasp by now of how it kind of fits together and works. So obviously not by memory, but even just cross-referencing some of the key terms for where your planets are in what house and what sign, hopefully is kind of generated a bit of thought or a bit of reminiscing or a bit of insight into yourself and into your own natal chart. Like I said, those are the foundations: our sun, our nodes, our ascendant. However, the other side of this, and two of the most important planets for women in particular, is our moon, first of all, which I will talk about in this video, and Venus, who I'll talk about in the next video. I've also added in Juno because I love working with Juno and I think it's really, really interesting. So the moon, when we talk about how a well-rounded person functions, we talk about who they are, which is their sun, how they go about doing whatever it is that they achieve, which is the ascendant, and then we come back to why did they do it, which is our moon sign. So in astrology, our moon sign represents our emotions. As women, it represents our hormones, it represents our feelings, it represents what we need to listen to in this lifetime, what we need to treat with divine feminine yin energy. So listening, observing, honoring, ritualizing, being compassionate, being gentle, being understanding. So when you look at your own moon sign, look at, first of all, of course, the sign that it's in, but look at the house that it's in, because that's the area of your life throughout your lifetime that you need to be most honoring of yourself, where you need to listen to yourself, you need to have compassion with yourself, because it's also where you are most vulnerable. And for women in particular, because we are so impacted by the moons, it'll often show up a lot of our physical or hormonal sensitivities as well. So if you've had issues or difficulty around expressing your moon sign, for a lot of women, and especially as you're all quite intuitive, having worked with most of you one-on-one before, it'll often show up in, in mood fluctuations, in hormonal issues, fertility issues, that kind of thing. So it's really, really worth getting to know your moon sign and honoring that and bringing it out in some way. The moon for us, I suppose, begins with the first experience of unconditional love, which is technically our mother. So for a lot of us that had a positive mothering experience, the moon will represent how we care for others, how our mother taught us to care for others, and how our mothers taught us to care for ourselves. But of course, not everyone had that unconditional love, not everyone had that easy relationship with their mother, or whoever took on the mothering role in their early years. So, if you had a single dad, or if, you were adopted or something like this, then that would be represented by the moon as well, because it represents when you were born, your first night out of the womb, the first time that the doctors, the nurses, whoever was around you, who was paid to be there, left, and it was just you and one other immediate person. That is what the moon represents for us from birth. It represents trust, it represents vulnerability, sensitivity, purity, intuition. So both mothering, how we mother others, and how we were mothered. So when we will talk a little bit more in a few weeks about aspects. One thing it's always really interesting to look at is what planets your moon is near or what aspects it has. And you'll be able to see that on the table of your natal chart. What influences are around your moon? Because, for example, if you have an aspect between Moon and Pluto, you might have had a difficult relationship with your mother, you might have had power struggles. Sometimes Moon-Venus relationships can show that your mother had a particularly strong impact on the way that you viewed your own body or the way that you treated yourself as you got older. So that is really a really important point in women's charts, is to look at what is aspecting the moon, because it does represent how we treat ourselves throughout our lifetime. And obviously when we go on to forming relationships with other people, you know, we teach them how to treat us based on how we were taught to treat ourselves. So this is why it's so important to pay attention to your moon sign, because it represents the vulnerability and the core need behind whatever it is that we're doing with our sun, with our other planets, with our nodes, whatever we're working towards, anything like that. The thing about the moon is that we can't necessarily follow it, okay? So it's not our sun sign. So a lot of times people who follow their moon deeply and fully will tend to have hormonal fluctuations, empathic burnout, dramatic circumstances, relationships in roller coaster, and that's when the moon is showing up too heavily in our lives. So when we're either paying it too much attention or we're not paying it enough attention. So because the moon, as we know, functions in a state of cycle, we have to treat our moon sign in the natal chart like that. We need to incorporate it, but without following it, because it's tidal, it's a feminine energy, it rises and it falls. It doesn't have that straight focus and drive that our sun sign does. You know, so what your sun sign or your nodes pull you towards over a series of years, your moon sign will change and will evolve as you go on through your life. So it's something that you need to listen to, you know, but not necessarily throw the baby out with the bathwater if your moon sign is telling you to do that. So an example, I always use myself for an example just because it's easier than trying to find someone that everyone knows about. So my own moon sign is in the 3rd house of communication. So I really thrive off verbal support, verbal praise. I'm gonna be tongue-tied there, but I've never been a big person for gifts. I've never been a big person for displays of money or that sort of thing. It wasn't really that meaningful. But getting an email, getting a testimonial, getting something where someone just says thank you, that meant a lot to me, or that helped me, or whatever, you know, that's something that could sustain me for weeks or months of difficulty. And so if I listen to that too much, you know, if I'm aware of that, so in my relationships, I communicate that this is what I need, you know, like, oh, flowers are nice, but I would rather you just say thank you, or I would rather you just write a card, or, you know, verbally appreciate something, because that means most to me. And if I went to the other extreme of pursuing verbal validation in order to feel emotionally stable all the time, well, I would be surrounded by drama, which I'm not. And that's the thing about the moon sign, is you have to honor it and you have to make a place for it, but you can't let it run your life. And as intuitives, we tend to go through a phase of either blocking out our emotional needs, challenging what we've been